Hey everybody, this is the Sliders Review, and since it's Women's History Month, I'm here today to talk to you about Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Season 7, Episode Field of Fire. Field of Fire is one of my favorite episodes, although there are some things that are a bit confusing and irritating in this episode. It feels like the writing was a bit clumsy and rushed at times. But all in all, it is a pretty solid episode, and it's a really interesting, very different episode. Voyager had a very similar episode that deals with a murder mystery and stuff. I feel like the Voyager episode was a bit more interesting because it had a whole lot more stuff to do and a whole lot of shocking reveals. Whereas this one only has really like two shocking reveals. And so I picked this episode for a couple of different reasons. One, it's one of my favorite episodes, and I want to start talking more about my favorite Star Trek episodes. And two, this is a Ezri Dax solo episode. And with it being Women's History Month, I was traditionally just gonna go with either Jadzia Dax or Kira Nerys, because those would be the more logical, ones to go to because they've been on the show for a whole lot longer and they have a whole lot more solo episodes. But Ezri always gets the short end of the stick, and I feel bad for the actress Nicole because she played the role extremely well. She's very likable. It's just her character didn't have time to grow and develop because she was only in one season, in the last season of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. And I always felt bad because it always seemed like the writers couldn't figure out what to do with this character. She's technically a counselor, and when she first shows up, she's just an ensign directly out of Starfleet. And so she hasn't had much experience and training out in the field or doing anything else, not even counseling for that much. But she's supposed to be like a pretty good counselor. But when you see her, she really doesn't counsel that much. Like with Deanna Troi, we saw her be a counselor all the time. But with like the new Dax, you don't really see that. She was a counselor probably for when she met Garrett in that one episode, but she didn't even do a very good job. And he kind of came to the conclusion on his own, kind of, as she was coming to her own conclusions. And so the thing about her, they tried to make her likable by making her do other things other than counseling, which really confused and bothered me a bit and stuff, because it's kind of like on one episode when they're on that where were they at? Were they on a planet or an asteroid fighting the Jim Hadar? They had her assist an engineer either building or repairing a device. And all I can think of, since when can a counselor be an engineer? Then in this episode, they have her investigate a murder mystery. And I'm just like, when is she a detective? When is she a security guard? So it's kind of like they try to make her a Jane of all trades or a Jacqueline of all trades, And it was because they could not figure out what to do with this character. Like when they introduced Seven of Nine in Voyager, Seven of Nine was not supposed to be a Kes replacement. She was supposed to be her own character. Problem is, Ezri is a Jadzia replacement, even to the point of trying to give her a love romance with Worf, and he rejected her at first because he didn't want nothing to do with her because she's not his Dax, and because she has Jadzia memories, she kept like falling in love with him, and then so that didn't work out. Then she started a relationship with the Doctor towards the end. Then she had that relationship, best friend thing with Benjamin Sisko, but it never felt earned because she was just going on the memories of the other Daxes and stuff. And so it's kind of like they kept shoving her in one situation after like another, and like one relationship after another, and it never felt genuine and stuff. Now she had some good stuff with like Worf and all this other stuff, but it's just kind of like she was kind of just piggying back off of what Jadzia did, and I always felt that was never fair for the actress. And I wish she could reappear in like a newer Star Trek series like Picard or something, but that would never happen. And so it's kind of like I always felt like she got the short end of the stick. And so I really want to do like this video for her and stuff like that for her character. But like I said before, it's not a perfect episode. It is a solid episode. And it actually gives her something to do. However, it's just a bit on the confusing side. And it's kind of like, O'Brien was that jack of all trades character, but we actually got to know this dude from TNG and then all seasons of DS9. So for him, it made sense because not only that, but he's a petty officer who's just been bouncing around from like position to position and stuff. And with her, it just felt like they were shoving her in whatever role they could because they couldn't figure out anything for her. Now, she did have one really good episode when she went back home to solve like an occurrence that was happening there. That was really good and stuff. But I like this episode a whole lot more, and also because of the simple fact, it's just one of my favorites. So the show starts off in the promenade, and it's a group of officers talking. Now, not a lot of characters get a lot of screen time. They just pop in and they pop out. The doctor and Chief O'Brien are there, and the doctors talk about how great this one new ensign is. He's fresh out of Starfleet. He's a lieutenant, junior rank and stuff. And so he idolizes both O'Brien and the doctor. And so the doctor talking about how great of a pilot he is and this and that. But here's what I don't understand. If he's a pilot, why isn't he wearing a red uniform? Why is he wearing yellow and stuff? That don't make no sense. And so, yeah, I hate when they do that crap. And so, like, he asks if he can go to the hollow suite with that of O'Brien and the doctor. And they flat out tell him no. And that really irritated me because they're being very selfish in this episode. And it somewhat comes back to bite them in the butt. And it really shows just how selfish they are when they're their own little clique and they don't want nobody to butt in and stuff. And that always irritated me about those two. It's great that they're best friends. They started off as couldn't stand each other, or at least the chief couldn't stand the doctor. But it's really one of those irritating things where it's kind of like Tom and Harry, but they will allow other people to hang out with them in the holodeck and stuff. So they leave, and then so Kira and Ezri talk to that dude. They get a little tipsy, he gets drunk, and Ezri takes him back to his quarters. And so and I noticed that Ezri is also a lieutenant at this point. Now this is another thing that kind of bugged me. They kind of just bumped her up in ranks very quickly. The first appearance she was there, she was an ensign, and then within 1 or 2 episodes, Cisco made her a lieutenant junior grade, and it's how? She hasn't had the experience yet. So I always hate when they do that to characters on the show. I remember it used to happen in TNG all the time. Geordi kept bumping up every rank until he made lieutenant commander in every season he was in. And so he's reminiscing about his cadet days, looking at 2 of his friends. One died and one stationed someplace else. And so Ezra goes back to her quarters. Oh, he also flirts with her a little bit. Anyway, the next morning when she wakes up and everything, she hears some commotion. He has been murdered. And it's well, holy crap, who did it and stuff, And so they're examining the body, but I don't really see them have a tricorder. And I don't remember hearing a tricorder. So it's kind of how are they examining the body without a tricorder? But I don't remember hearing one. Maybe there is, maybe they're not. And so Odo's doing his and detective type skills and everything. And Odo is able to determine that there's some type of chemical powder residue near his wound, but there isn't a lot. And so the doctor should have probably been able to figure that out, but he wasn't. And then it turns out he was actually shot with a bullet projectile. Now this is extremely rare in Star Trek because they use phasers. And so they don't understand, with the impact of the burst on his chest and everything, the person would have to be at close range. Well, of course, Ezri was the only person who saw him last. Now, she's not a suspect and everything, which you would assume they would be hey, since you're the last person to see him alive, you're our number one suspect. But Odo don't do that, and Odo barely knows her and stuff. Everybody there barely knows her. So I don't understand why she's not the number one suspect. But anyways, long story short, Chief O'Brien remembers that, Starfleet, well, somebody remembers that Starfleet came up with a prototype rifle that shoots out a bullet. And he tells them it's the TR-116. And that was used in areas where there was like dampening fields and they couldn't use a conventional phaser. But then Starfleet decided to abandon the project after the prototype was constructed, and they went back to like traditional phasers and stuff. So somebody must have replicated, because it's in every ship file in the Starfleet type base or ship. But the only people who can access it is Starfleet officers. So every Starfleet officer is like a suspect, but you never see nobody interrogating anybody and stuff, which is kind of irritating. This is why that Voyager episode was a bit better, because they handled this a whole lot better. And so, like, the captain, because Ezra's like a counselor, or Ezri's a counselor, he's all like, don't you have training in psychological criminal background, some crap like that. And so he wants her on the case. And so for the most part, she is the main person investigating the case, like she's some kind of security guard. And that makes no sense. Now, it would make more sense if Odo accompanied her in the investigation, but he's doing all his stuff off screen, which is really weird and stuff. So it would make more sense if those two were like investigating the murder together, but they're not. And so they just leave her to pretty much do it on her own while everybody else is giving her like clues and stuff. And this is where I'm saying, where, how is she able to do all that? Now, she does get some assistance. I'll get to that a little bit later. But how exactly is she able to figure all this crap out when she's just a counselor, How often do you see a counselor crack a case and like a cop and everything, So anyways, they're trying to figure out how in the world did the person shoot them through like the bulkhead if there's like no bullet holes through like the bulkhead and everything. And so the doctor's talking about something stupid. But anyway, the doctor's feeling bad about himself because he's all like, man, if I just would have said yes to letting that dude hang out with us on the Hollow Suite, then he would have been alive. So it's kind of like, yeah, man, you were being selfish. But we find out that dude would end up dead anyway, because the doctor is talking about something stupid, about a bullet ricocheting off different like objects that hit like a trick shot and something that's really hard to get to, which makes O'Brien think of something very clever because he's an engineer. He's all like, that must be how like the killer did it. The killer shot from like a different location away from his quarters. He must have like placed like a miniature like transporter on the rifle and had like a targeting sensor to see through the bulkheads and everything. I'm thinking to myself, wow, that's kind of like clever, but he deduced that super, super, super fast. Like, how in the world does he know that's exactly how it happened? And so like, not only is that the way it happens, but the killer replicated the exact same way O'Brien did with the transport and stuff. So that's why I feel like the writing is kind of rushed. Like, how will both of these people come up with the same exact idea? You know what I'm saying? And so, like, how did they know it's not like an alien bullet that, like, has a transporter to it or something like that? Or there's a transporter inside, like, the bullet, but whatever. Now, the whole thing about the whole bullet thing confuses me. Now, here's the reason why. Now, the TR-116 has a great design to it. And it's the only time it shows up in Star Trek history, unless you like the video games and stuff like that. And so it makes me wonder how the bullet's gonna travel through that teeny, teeny, tiny little like shaft of the barrel and stuff. But anyway, here is the problem I'm so confused about. When I used to watch Star Trek back in the day, like TNG, and you see a torpedo shoot out from the ship, I always assumed that, it was like a phaser. Like, the torpedo, just a big ball of energy photonic light. Or proton light or whatever, or quantum light. But no, it's actually an actual mechanical like tube. It's an actual torpedo, a missile that's made, it's 3D, made of metal, all this other stuff, right? Somehow when it shoots out from the ship, somehow it's like it has this aura around it with like light energy, and when it hits the object, it explodes a whole lot harder. And then we've seen torpedoes shoot out without that really fancy light stuff like in Voyager. So I always assume that when not the phasers that shoot out with a long stream of like phase energy and stuff, I'm talking about like in First Contact, they had the phaser rifles, they shoot out like a projectile of light. I always assumed it was just a teeny tiny bullet and everything, right? But apparently it's not. Now you have other conventional things that actually do shoot out a bullet. So I'm confused as to what the heck is coming out a phaser rifle when it's like a ball of light. And so the tracking sensor is like a little eyepiece, right? And it can literally see through anything. I'm thinking to myself, how come they don't ever use that when looking for like an alien intruder on the ship? Or they have to like look inside the body instead of using like a scanner. Wouldn't that be more helpful? And so this technique has never been used on screen before, and I don't understand why they don't use it more. The whole tracking sensor eyepiece will come in such handy. And so like Esri's having like a bad nightmare, and one of her other like hosts is talking to her. It's Joran, the murderer, the one who was a magician, not magician, but musician, and then like he murdered somebody that like he that was having an affair with him and stuff like that. That dude. Now he's played by a different person, and I like him. This episode has a very Hannibal Silence of the Lambs feel. Like even Joran is acting like Hannibal Lecter in a sense. So he's telling her, perform the ritual and bring me forward and all this other crap. Well, by this time, another person has ended up dead. They don't know the pattern because the first dude who died, he's only been on the ship for 10 days. The other lady who died, she's been on the ship for 5 years. So it causes Esri to summon Joran in that ritual and everything. And right from the start, he's trying to manipulate her, trying to egg her on, telling her how are you gonna figure out the killer if you don't even know what the feel of the weapon is? So he makes her get the rifle, put it in her hands. He makes her put on the tracking sensor thing. And he literally tells her, get a good feel for your weapon. Feel the handle, feel the shaft, feel everything. Look through the eyepiece and everything, and start looking around for your prey. And then so she finds, and she starts looking around on the promenade. He's like, no, that's too public of an area. This person wants something more personal, something where nobody can discover anything, somebody's quarters. So he makes her go into somebody's quarters, and she finds an officer and everything. And he's egging her on to pull the trigger, and then she gets frustrated, but he's like, it's not even loaded and stuff. He is literally trying to get her to get inside the mind of a killer by acting like a killer herself. That is very Hannibal from the TV show, when Will used to pretend he was Hannibal Lecter, making all these kills and everything. And that show ended up doing that a little bit better. But I do like the little back and forth frustration they have with each other. These two cannot get along because she doesn't want to have to go on that level of him, and he badly wants her to. He wants her to embrace her dark side because he is a part of her. He doesn't like how Jadzia and Cruzon kept him buried, which is weird about Jadzia because she did at one point, started to embrace him, I think, until he tried to kill somebody when he was in Sisko's body as a host. But anyways, it even gets to the point where she wants to get rid of him, and she's starting to do the ritual again until Odo calls her with the death of another body. And so she cannot, for the love of her, figure out the pattern. Maybe because she's not a security officer. She's not a detective. She's just a counselor. Now, she should be able to understand how the mind of a killer works because she is a counselor, so she can help out in the investigation, but her doing it solo is weird. In a way, there's a scene with her and Worf, and she's on the promenade by herself, and Worf is all it's too dangerous for you to be walking around with a killer and all this other stuff and blah, blah, blah. But this happened a lot earlier, a lot earlier, before she called Joran and stuff. And I hate how they try to make Worf kind of like, want to like be with her, knowing that the symbiote is in her. But what's weird is that he's not in love with her. He is in love with Dax. Yes, the symbiote is inside you, and it does make you remember stuff, but you are your own person. It's not like TNG when the symbiote took like over and everything. And so that was always a weird love thing that they always had going on with us too. But then anyways, so like she goes in the quarters of like the victims and everything, which is smart. You think she'll be able to figure that out, but she doesn't. He has to persuade her to do it. He wants her to look around and get clues, but she's at the point where she's so frustrated. This is what's so weird about her. She's not a very good counselor and everything. And so like when they're trying to figure out like, why this killer is doing it and who it could be, Duran's a bit of a smart mouth and likes to make fun of people, and he makes fun of the Bolian who is dead. The Bolian has a wife and like a boyfriend and stuff, and he has kids, and he's all like, these are some very unattractive kids. And so he's like, just look at this smile, it's unattractive. And then that makes her think of something. She's all remembers something that she saw in the other rooms. Every person who died was seen laughing, smiling in a photograph and everything. And so Duran's all like, so it's somebody who doesn't like humor or doesn't like people smiling and hates emotion. Well, of course, the only person they can think of who can do something like that will have to be a Vulcan, a rogue Vulcan. But then Duran's all like, something must be wrong with him to where he has like pushed aside all logic. Like his logic thinking is flawed now. But there's only like, I forget, it's like 52 or 82, something like that, Vulcans on the ship. So they have to like start narrowing down. But when they start looking down at the people of all the Vulcans on the ship, you don't see them like looking down at the list and everything. You don't see them going through their profiles and nothing like that. What could trigger them to have this emotional outrage and stuff. And so like they have to, but then she doesn't understand there's people on the promenade. I'll get to that part later. They're on the promenade and they're looking at Vulcans, and they look about like two of them. So there ain't that many on the show, but they could put some people in prosthetics, but they don't. And so she doesn't understand. There are tons of people on the promenade. Why not kill them there who are smiling and laughing? Duran comes up with the idea that probably because, it's like a photograph. And then she comes up with the whole, because a photograph is kind of like frozen in time. So in frozen in time, he feels like people are laughing at him for many years to come. So when they're in like a turbo lift and everything, all of a sudden, a random Vulcan comes in there, right? And Duran is looking at him. He's all like, that's him. That's the killer. I can just tell just by looking at him. How? He's a Vulcan. He has no expression. He has no emotion. So this was the part where sloppy writing comes to play, because they're able to figure out who the actual legit killer is within seconds and stuff. Because at first there was this one Starfleet officer who was running. She trips him up and she nearly kills him because Duran is forcing her to almost stab him with a knife. Sisko tells her that the officer is just a dude who likes to collect weapons. Now, it's pretty sad that a counselor is being persuaded by a spirit. And, I guess he has some mental hold on her, but not much. But she's supposed to be a good counselor, but yet she gets persuaded by, like, a murderer and stuff. Anyways, when she goes back to her quarters, she takes up the rifle and she looks through the little scope to see what that Vulcan is doing. He's looking at somebody's file. He's looking at her file. They determine he is indeed the one when they look up his service record. He was on the ship that got his butt whooped by the Jem'Hadar, and only 6 people survived. So with all his friends and crewmates dead, he lost his mind and everything. So he leaves and he picks up his rifle that looks identical to her with a little transporter thing on the end of it and the tracking sensor. And so Duran tells her, just take your shot. You ain't got time to call security or nothing like that. And so they both fire at the same time, but she hits him first. And she hits him in the shoulder, and then he hits like a bulkhead like slightly near her. So then she still don't call security. She goes in and finds him. By this time, he should have been able to grab like the rifle because he's crawling towards it. She steps on it and asks him straight up, "Why are you doing this?" And he's all like, "Because logic demands it." But that's all we get from him. They don't investigate him anymore or nothing like that. Anyways, at the end, she does the ritual, sends Duran back. He doesn't really want to go back, but he goes anyway. And it just ends. So all in all, like I said, it's a solid episode, but it's a really flimsy episode on how they execute the story. Things just happen for the sake of happening because of plot armor. And they really didn't do no good, juicy, detective-y type skills. But I am glad they did give her something to do because, and it did tie in slightly into her counseling. Only problem is she really didn't use that much of a counseling technique to figure out who, the killer is. And that's a huge flaw they have with her and her character. I wish she could have been introduced much earlier and stuff. They could have developed her character so much better, like 7 and 9, who had the benefit of 4 seasons to be developed and stuff. Happy Women's History Month, everybody. All right, I'll talk to you later. Bye.